In this video, we'll be dissecting the muscles of the chest. The muscles of the chest are, just like any other muscles that you've been dissecting, are covered by connective tissue, and you're going to spend a little time removing this. Now, the connective tissue, you probably want to use maybe the curved end of your forceps, and then just pick and pull, almost in like a scraping manner. You can do it that way, or if you're confident, if you want to remove off larger chunks, you can pull up on connective tissue and then use scissors to cut it off. So if I know this is connective tissue, pull this off and then just cut off larger chunks. I prefer just using the forceps. They seem to work just fine. And again, you remove connective tissue so that you can have a better view of the muscles. Now, just to orient yourself with the cat, this end up here is the head. This here is by the abdomen, just in case you're wondering. You can't tell from the video. All right, so I'm just gonna remove some connective tissue. You're gonna want to do the same as well. And then as soon as I'm done removing all the connective tissue, I will bring you back for the dissection of the chest muscles. So now that I've removed most of the connective tissue from the chest, the 4 surface chest muscles we're going to begin to dissect. Now, when you look at the chest muscle, or you try to find the chest muscles to dissect, you have to look at the change in striation patterns. So the first muscle has striations that run in this direction. The second muscle has striations that run in this direction, and they run under the first muscle. The third muscle has striations that run in this direction, and they run under the second muscle. And the fourth muscle has striations running in this direction, and they run under the third muscle. So when you look for the chest muscles, or when you look to begin to dissect the chest muscles, look for the change in striation patterns. In class, we talked about this being the lines of demarcation, where muscles overlap each other. So this muscle here has striations that run this way. I can clearly see it, and I can clearly see the striations of this muscle going underneath it. And this right here would be the line of demarcation. So I'm going to start picking my connective tissue here. Now, this is the time when you guys will really want to be careful when you use your forceps. You just want to carefully lift the connective tissue. You don't want to really poke and scratch it like we've done with other dissections. And that's because these muscles are so thin that you can shred them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create pockets, and this is where you're going to use your scissors and your scalpels almost extensively to separate these muscles. So if you notice, all I'm doing is just kind of loosening up the connective tissue by pulling and moving back and forth until I get enough of my forceps underneath. I do that in both directions. Once I'm comfortable, then I'll go ahead and either use my scalpel or my scissors to make that cut. So in this case, I'm going to use my scissors, and then I'll just repeat. So I'll continue following in this direction because I can clearly see the line runs right through here. I'm just going to go follow that line. Again, move some connective tissue. Now this time I'm going to use my scalpel. So if you decide you want to use your scalpel, I would advise you to protect the underlying muscle either with your forceps, right? Take your forceps, spread them apart, and if you can see the line, go ahead and use a fresh blade scalpel and go ahead and make that cut. That would be what I would recommend. So again, I'm just going to continue. This time I'm going to use my scissors. I know it's connective tissue because I can see my forceps. When I pull, right, when I pull the muscle, you can see it separates right in this area. So when I pull, you can see here's muscle right here, here's connective tissue right here. So it's safe. I can cut. So I'm going to lift the muscle, and I'm going to cut with small snips the connective tissue. Okay, so you can see when I fold this muscle over, you see there's still connective tissue holding onto this muscle. You can use your blunt probe, right, to push down and pull up, right, push down, pull up like we've done with previous dissections, right? And you can see just how flat this muscle is here. So I've only dissected one side. I haven't dissected the other side yet. I'll do that here in a second. But all I'm doing right now is just push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, just to separate this side. So you can see in here, there, I've already separated this one side of this muscle here. So now I'm going to try working on the other side. Again, I have to look for the line of demarcation. Right? And it looks like the line is going to be, if you stretch your muscle here, you can see here's the line of demarcation. So just like I did with the bottom part of this muscle here, I'm going to do the same with the top part of this muscle. I'm going to work at the connective tissue, try to get my forceps underneath, and then back and forth until I can use my scalpel. Right? I still have a little bit of connective tissue that kind of blocks my way. I'm probably going to start on this side just so it's easy for you guys to see through the camera if I can. Try to get my forceps underneath. There's my forceps, right? Go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, just to move a little bit of the connective tissue, right? And then take the scissors and go ahead and cut. And just repeat, back and forth, right? Where's the connective tissue? And cut. By now, you guys have mastered your dissection techniques, and you can easily start to separate muscles. So here's another technique. I'm going to get my forceps under, and this time I'm going to use my scalpel, and I'm just going to cut along the forceps. Right, protecting the underlying muscles. Right, so I lift with my forceps. My forceps are now protecting underlying structures, and I'm just going to run my blade on top of the forceps. Okay. All right. We're getting there. It's tedious, but we're getting there. All right, so this time I can see my line. I'm just going to go simply follow it with my blade. All right, and this is another technique where if you're super careful, you can just create your outline. All right, again, if you have a sharp scalpel, this makes it really, really easy to do. Separate this muscle. If you notice, I hold my scalpel at an angle to the muscle, almost parallel to the muscle itself. I don't cut down into the muscle, and that's because I know these muscles are flat, and if I cut down into the muscle, I'm going to cut deeper muscles. So here I've began the separation. Right. All right. So you can see here's the top of this muscle. I've separated it. I've begun the separation part from this muscle here. So I'm just going to continue to separate. Again, because I can see my line clearly, I'm just going to go ahead and use my scalpel. I'm not going to use anything else. I'm just lightly cutting the connective tissue. Right. If I use my forceps to pull, I can see the connective tissue. right? All right, so I'm gonna start push pulling so I can see more connective tissue, so I continue the separation. All right, so I can see the separation down here. I'm prying the two muscles apart. I'm just gonna take my scalpel and I'm just going to carefully separate. All right. Okay. So there's this muscle. You can see there's still some connective tissue in the back that's holding down. I'm just going to cut that off again, just to clean up the dissection a little bit. So there's some removal of connective tissue, and there is the first chest muscle. This muscle here is called the pectoantebrachialis. Next, we'll dissect this muscle, which goes underneath the pectoantebrachialis. So the easiest way to separate this muscle from this muscle here, right, is if you look by the armpit, you can see the connective tissue line. You can see the line of demarcation around the armpit area, and this is where I would start picking at the connective tissue. As you can see that this muscle here has striations that go underneath the pectoantebrachialis. This muscle is called pectoralis major. So I'm going to begin by stretching out the arm, right? By pulling on the arm laterally. And what that does is it stretches out the muscles and it allows me to see the lines of demarcation a little easier. So I'm going to pick at this connective tissue here. I can see, if you can see in the video, right? Here's a difference in striation patterns. The striation goes this way on the pectoralis major, and this muscle that's underneath it goes this way. So I'm going to simply just start working on the connective tissue, right? I'm not picking down at it. I'm actually just lifting and seeing if I can get my forceps underneath, right? And then see if I can cut it with scissors so I can clearly see the line. See what happens from there. Again, if you're super careful and you identify the line, you can use your scalpel. Again, it's really handy if you have a fresh blade. That would make it really nice to dissect. So here's the line that I'm working on right here, and I'm gonna use my scalpel this time. Let's see if I can use my scalpel. So I'm gonna use my forceps and put my forceps underneath the line of demarcation, and I'm gonna carefully just cut along my my forceps, just cutting the forceps. That way I'm not cutting the muscle. And there you go, separation of connective tissue. So I'm gonna repeat the process, get my forceps underneath, right? See the connective tissue, work on the connective tissue, loosen it up a little bit, and then you can either use your scalpel like I just showed you, or if you have a large enough opening, you can use your scissors. So this time I'm going to use the scissors. I can see that it's connective tissue, short snips. Okay, so I'm beginning again the separation of the pectoralis major from the pec minor. Let's see what I can do. Let's try the push down, pull. Some more connective tissue right here. pushing down on the pectoralis minor, pulling up on the pectoralis major, and now you can see here's the pec major. All right, I can actually take this line a little further down here, and I'll attempt to do that carefully, of course. And this is where it gets a little challenging as you get closer to the chest. The muscles really start to adhere to one another. So like I said, I'll attempt. I may not be successful, but I will. There's a line right here, and I'll see if I can, how far I can do the pec major. Chances are I'll probably stop. I probably won't go any further, but I'll attempt. Right, just to kind of see. Right, so I loosen up a little bit of connective tissue. Let's grab the scissors. That's pretty much as far as I'm gonna go. All right, so I've separated the pectoralis major from the pectoralis minor. So next, I'm gonna separate the pec minor from this muscle right here called the xiphohumerales, and you can see that there's a connective tissue that joins these two muscles. You can see that the xiphohumerales, if you look at the striations, the xiphohumerales actually goes under the pec minor. So we're gonna separate this. I mean, if you have connective tissue, you can go ahead and remove that. Here's the lower border of the xiphohumerales. So I'm gonna go ahead and start picking at this connective tissue. I'll probably end up using some scissors to remove this. So all I'm doing is just removing some connective tissue. Right, so here's the xiphohumerales, the lower part of the xiphohumerales. So it's a really thin, flat muscle, so I'm gonna be careful at, when I remove it. There is some connective tissue that has to carefully be removed off the surface. Right. You get your forceps underneath. You could probably loosen it by wiggling your forceps back and forth, like I'm doing here, see? And take your scissors and go ahead and cut and see what happens. Lift and cut, lift and cut. Okay. And you can see there's the xiphohumerales underneath this connective tissue. And I just have to carefully pull this connective tissue off without damaging the muscle. So here, some more connective tissue. So it just takes a while because there's just so much connective tissue. It's a tedious process, but I'm slowly removing it. Again, I remove connective tissue so I have a better view of the muscle. Right. So I can see here's the boundary connective tissue and the xiphohumerales. I'm just going to go ahead and take my scissors and just cut. It'll save me some time with the dissection. And that's as far as I want to cut here. Next, I'm going to spend some time now removing any excess connective tissue off of the pec minor, right? So that now I can get to the xiphohumerales. So here's the bottom part of the xiphohumerales, right? And it goes all the way underneath, right? So now I'm just going to have to dissect this part right here, this connective tissue, which should be relatively simple. If I just lift up on the pec minor, I can do it. Or if I just go like I've been doing, lift the connective tissue and lift up, and then use my scissors, right, to cut. Just carefully cut that connective tissue. And then I will have separation here. Oh, I'm just carefully moving the pec minor. Here's the top part of the xipha humerales right here. So now I can cut any excess connective tissue off of the side carefully. Right. And there you go. And there's the xipha humerales. So like I mentioned, the xipha humerales tucks in underneath the pec minor. So if you do the push-pull, 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 I'm lifting up on pec minor, right? I'm pushing down on xipha humerales. You can see, here's the xipha humerales. I'm going to remove a little more connective tissue off the edge of the xipha humerales, and there you go, right? So the surface chest muscles, again, are the pectoantebrachialis, pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, and the xipha humerales. Now the deep muscle that we're going to dissect is actually going to be found under here. And the easiest way to get to it, or the only way to get to it, is you have to separate the latissimus dorsi from the chest muscles, and you have to do it right here at this location. And this gets a little tricky because you don't want to cut any of the surface chest muscles, so you have to be really careful, because what's going to end up happening is once you separate these chest muscles, you're actually going to reflect, right, the latissimus dorsi and the chest muscles to get to this muscle down here, to get to this deep muscle. So I'm carefully, right, just separating, right, connective tissue, right, that connects the latissimus dorsi and the chest muscles to one another. So it's right here. You can see that carefully. So I'm pulling this connective tissue. I have no worries about cutting that off. So here's the latissimus dorsi. Here are the chest muscles. I've kept them intact, and now I'm just kind of separating them by push-pull. So here are the surface chest muscles, right? And then the next muscle that I have to get to is actually right here. It's called the serratus ventralis. So you can see there's a lot of connective tissues, a lot of fat. We're going to get rid of this until you can see it. But the serratus ventralis kind of looks like a little fan. So I'll do the best I can trying to hold the cat in this position while dissecting. It might be a little challenging or tricky, but I'll do it. I'll try it. So by removing the connective tissue, hopefully you can start to see the serratus ventralis. So give me a moment. Let me remove all this stuff. This is all nerves and connective tissue, right? These are nerves that feed into the muscle to help during respiration, and we really don't need those. We're not studying those. So again, all I'm doing is just moving connective tissue or pulling off connective tissue so that you can actually see the muscle. But like I mentioned, the serratus ventralis is going to look like a fan, right? It's going to look like one of those old fans that radiate from a point, and then it has all these pieces that extend out from that single point. As soon as I get to it, I'll show it to you. Okay, so here's that single point that I was talking about, and you have all of these individual pieces that radiate from that single point, right, that we have to separate and dissect out. Right. So for this one here, use your scalpel. It's going to make it a lot easier. And all you have to do is really just break the connective tissue between each band. And that's pretty much all you're doing. If you come across, you can't see clearly the line, that means your view is being obstructed by connective tissue. Just go ahead and remove it, and take your scalpel. Again, you're just looking at the radiating fibers, or these bands. And that is, let's see. And that is it. So this fan shape, right, looks like it radiates from a single point and has all these individual parts. That's called the serratus ventralis. All right. So one final recap of all the chest muscles. All right. You have the pecto antebrachialis. Below the pecto antebrachialis, you have the pectoralis major. Below pec major, you have pectoralis minor. Below the pectoralis minor, you have the xiphi humerales. And then when you reflect the latissimus dorsi in the chest muscles, you have this muscle here, right, called the serratus ventralis. And this concludes the dissection of the muscles of the chest.